Welcome to a Mackenzie Institute Long Talk. Retired Police Inspector Anil Anand has worked with Interpol. He's worked undercover. He's been an expert witness. And he used his spare time during his long and successful policing career to obtain advanced degrees in business and law. He's the author of Mending Broken Fences Policing. Anil Anand is on the line. Hello.
Good morning, Alan.
Now, that concept of broken windows policing is associated with Rudy Giuliani in New York, and it is said that when you look after the little details like litter and graffiti and jaywalking, I suppose, big crime goes down. But there are people who question that, and one of them is you. Why do you?
Well, Bill Bratton and Ray Kelly, Rudy Giuliani, all of these folks, well-intentioned, tried to figure out how to be more accountable to the public and to politicians while dealing with their office, which was to reduce and respond to crime. They came up with a system of performance measurement that's called CompStat, which really goes back to the notion of computer-assisted communication. The idea is simply that if you get what you measure. So there was a great emphasis on trying to measure what was taking place out there and then responding to those issues quickly and relentlessly, which was the sort of the model for CompStat. The problem with that is that you get what you are doing out there. So if your officers are out there and you're expecting them to perform, they're going to go out and issue tickets and arrest people. They're motivated by that because that's the behavior that's rewarded. That doesn't necessarily mean that crime is up. But what you're recording is an increase in arrests, which then reflects the fact that crime may be up, that certain neighborhoods may be worse off than others. It distorts the reality of what may in fact be happening out there. And this is an issue which even Ray Kelly and William Bratton and Rudy Giuliani have contested amongst each other. They've blamed each other for cooking those stats publicly and admitting that now. So there are issues with performance measurement and that model of policing that I think we need to look at and be skeptical of.
Now, those people you mentioned are respectively the mayor, the police commissioner, and the police chief, if memory serves me correctly?
Correct. And I mean, it's not fair to pick on New York, but that is where CompStat originated. And it is sort of the gold standard of policing for the policing world. And a lot of things that happen in New York then get copied in LA and Toronto. So Toronto, for example, had a very similar response. Instead of calling it CompStat, we just called it StatCom. So it's very careful. It's important that we look at these processes and see what sort of impact they have, because they can end up having global impact.
All right. Well, you've articulated very well the dilemma in all forms of research, including the academics who are watching, that if you find that there's an increase in something, did it really increase in frequency, or are you just better able to measure it? That's a problem everywhere. But I want to go back to looking after the details, because I thought that this broken windows policing meant look after the vandalism, the litter, the little things, and that will make bigger crimes go down. I think that's a different topic, and I don't think you agree with that either.
Well, the issue I have with that is that the broken windows theory essentially said that if you look at the little things in the community and an environment that serve as precursors for lawlessness and disorder, and you address those issues, then you will mitigate larger issues of crime and disorder. It wasn't that you go and enforce those issues, but it was to recognize those indicators so that you can deal then with the precursors that end up contributing to crime and disorder. Unfortunately, CompStat and policing took that one step further. So policing in New York, for example, looked at people that jumped turnstiles, a fairly small, insignificant issue, as an indicator of that would lead to larger issues of graffiti and vandalism and robberies and that kind of thing. So if you get rid of turnstile jumpers, you get rid of robberies and graffiti down the road. The problem is that communities that are most affected with deterioration and poor quality of and poor environmental and social conditions are usually the disenfranchised and the poorer neighborhoods. So when officers are looking for enforcement, they end up gravitating to those neighborhoods and doing enforcement within those neighborhoods on issues that are small: peeing in laneways, dog fouling, noise complaints, missing rear headlights, rear lights, those kinds of things, broken mufflers. But it doesn't deal with the precursors, the issues of poverty, the issues of single parenting, the issues of homelessness. Those things go unnoticed and unresponded to. So CompStat and policing then has sort of abused, adulterated broken windows policing. It's not being used for that purpose.
Well, the Mackenzie Institute is interested in security issues in all of what that term means, and part of it is public order. Now, I think people of goodwill may be of 3 or 4 minds about this issue, and one of them is, do we really want a $100,000 a year police officer in a car full of tens of thousands of dollars of kit, preoccupying himself or herself with littering or graffiti for an hour and a half or so? Is that the best use of a police officer's time? Conversely, I think people of my parents' generation would have said, what's somebody littering for anyway? That should be policed and looked after. It's a tough call, isn't it?
Well, it is a tough call, and policing and understanding policing is suffused with messages of the condition of society, the condition and position of people within that society, and the relationship of individuals and the state. So what police officers do, how they do it, where they do it, to whom they do, has a much larger impact on societal cohesion. So you're right. What should police officers be doing? 85% of a police officer's time in patrol is spent in a police car in non-citizen contact type activities. So what is it that we need to do as police leaders, as leaders in public administration, that'll focus our officers towards engaging with the communities in a way that's more meaningful, that deals with underlying issues of mental health, homelessness, poverty, all of those type of things?
Well, to continue with my multiple mindsets about this topic, first of all, the social scientists will tell us that crime went down in Washington at about the same time it went down in New York. Now it's a different city with different demographics, but there's no particular reason to believe it was the so-called broken windows policing that caused crime to go down. Secondly, if you are, I'll use an old-fashioned word from the 60s, if you're hassling people about graffiti and litter and broken windows, and then you go back to that community and want eyewitnesses to a more serious crime, organized crime perhaps, you may not get the cooperation you want. Is that part of your concern as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we're missing out on is the fact that we've become so focused on quantitative performance measurement, this focus on business intelligence and analytics, the counting of numbers. And we know that, if you do more enforcement, you're simply going to have more arrests, which will seem like you got more crime. And if officers decide that we're going to do the, exercise FIDO, which is F it, I'm just going to drive on because of liability issues, oversight, or I'm just not interested anymore in doing my job because of public complaints, it's going to appear as a crime's down because people are not being arrested. So numbers themselves don't answer the issue. What's important is that leaders determine when to have quantitative type policing measurements in place, when that's appropriate, and when to have qualitative type of performance measurement in place. Just because your officers are doing what you've asked them to do doesn't mean that their beliefs are aligned with their activities. They may simply be doing what you want to see them do, because that gets them rewarded with promotion, different assignments, that kind of thing, where actually the underlying beliefs are very different. I think the underlying beliefs are also very important to be able to be measured and assessed and motivated and shaped.
Well, it's not just policing, but it's all of business that has a ridiculous preoccupation with measurement of things that may defy measurement, or maybe the measurement is meaningless. And I'm talking about, let's just say, an industry You have customer service calls wrapped up within a minute and a half. That may be because you are moving your valued customers along too quickly and getting them off the line. In policing, I think it was either you or a ride-along conversation I had with a police officer that says, when you can respond to a call within 2 minutes, and that is 10 seconds quicker than last year because you use the siren and get there very quickly, there may be no need to get there quickly. It may not be an emergency, and you may simply be endangering the public health with the siren and the high speed.
Absolutely correctly. And it may not be the police that are required. It may be another emergency services that may be required. I think that triaging we do that much better today than we used to, simply because money funding is at a premium. So we want to make sure we allocate and respond with those resources as effectively and efficiently as possible.
And yet, the ride-along I was on, most of the evening's activities involved mental health issues. Someone found on the railroad tracks, someone in a park probably under the influence of drugs. Isn't it true that I heard up to 60% of policing time is spent on mental health issues, and it really should be another professional who responds to that call?
This is a dilemma that police leaders are grappling with, and I think they're working much more hand in hand with public health and health services now than ever before to try and respond to mental health issues. Mental health calls for services have increased. A great amount of time is spent on a mental health call, from responding to that call effectively to getting that person to the institution where they need to be assessed, waiting for that assessment to take place, and then making sure that the person is left in a safe environment. Now that takes a lot of time and effort. Is it a policing issue? Is that something that policing should be dealing with? How should those partnerships work? I think we are addressing those qualitative type issues today better than we have before, but we need to go further. Simply counting the number of murders, holdups, break and enters, car thefts, which are sort of the major crime indicators that police use, may be effective in a place like Chicago, where homicide rates and gang activity is at a premium right now. It's very high. So we need to focus on quantitative performance measurement. We need to get a handle on that issue. So that's really important. Maybe the quality is not, but in a city like Toronto, where crime's down significantly compared to a city like Chicago, and we're comparable, quantitative performance measurement is not as important as the quality of the performance of our officers within the community.
Now, you're speaking from Toronto, and that's also where you worked most of your career when you weren't on assignment or undercover. And I'm wondering why we don't use more big data and cameras, and I know there are privacy concerns and so on, but policing is very expensive, and a police officer, as I mentioned, earns $100,000 a year and has tens of thousands of dollars of kit on the belt and in the car. Routine traffic stops can take an hour. I've been involved in one, and wouldn't it be better to send people a ticket in the mail? All these no left turns and speeding and red light cameras, that would free up a lot of police officers' time, wouldn't it?
It would, and part of it is making sure that our officers are seen in the community. So yes, an officer may be ticketing somebody to street corner, and they may be there for half an hour, 40 minutes doing that, which is not always an effective way of spending that time. But if there isn't another more emergent call for service, that could be a very effective way of having the officer be seen doing something in that community. I've retired, and since I've retired, I'm really not that concerned or bothered with what's happening in my neighborhood. I don't spend my evenings looking at the stats from my local police department to see what they're doing. I'm not out here concerned because I live in a fairly safe neighborhood. But for somebody else in another neighborhood, they are there, and they need to see their police officers. That engagement needs to be direct and more meaningful, because a lot of the perception that communities, disenfranchised community, affected communities have of their police officers is not due to direct contact. It's because of what they hear from somebody else that may have had a contact, which might have been negative. So
now let's go back to your book and a concept that you're in favor of in the book, which is also in a bit of opposition to the Broken Windows School of Policing, and that is the word discretion. And I think you're pretty much in favor of it, but there is certainly a school of thought that says discretion is simply an officer allowing someone to break the rules. What are your comments?
Well, discretion is extremely important, and I'm not sure that we deal with discussions around discretion enough. Look, you can't control how dedicated an officer will be when he attends a crime scene, how quickly he responds to that crime scene, how effectively he makes his notes at a crime scene, how effectively he decides to disclose everything he's seen, heard, smelt, and felt at a crime scene during a disclosure, how well he decides to testify at a court, or how much he commits himself to providing support services to a victim of a crime at the end of it. A lot of that commitment is discretionary. So you can't simply quantify or proceduralize police response by saying, this is what I expect you to do as a police officer, and then if you meet all of these things, I'm fine. Much of what police officers do is discretionary, and it's really important that we look at how our officers exercise discretion, that it's exercised appropriately. Because there's another school of thought that suggests that discretion is in fact what gets police officers in trouble, that we should not give officers discretion. They should treat everybody exactly the same way, which also is not fair.
Well, okay, the Mackenzie Institute followers and friends are pretty law-abiding people, and they also are active in the community. There is this crazy phrase, if you see something, say something, pretty popular in America, and there's no indication of what we're looking for or who we should tell. What's your advice for people who want to be involved and make a positive contribution to public order, security, and safety?
Well, first of all, I think as organizations, as public service organizations, we have to provide meaningful opportunities for people to participate, where they can actually make differences. We need to go beyond just tokenistic involvement. A lot of these public engagement opportunities that we provide have become really meaningless. And I think if you talk to police officers who are being honest about it, they'll tell you that these are just meaningless exercises. We need to educate the public to engage in meaningful engagement with the police services, not just a few people who show up just because they've got some complaint or they just have, they're activist in a very narrow sense of the word. But we need to have a larger segment of society engage in what it is that they want from policing. And that's not happening. I don't think that engagement is there. There's very little motivation for me in my neighborhood to engage with my policing. And when I show up at some of these community policing liaison committees, which I did through my policing careers, if I'm being completely honest, only 1% of those people were really sincerely concerned about making a difference. They were properly informed, properly directed at trying to impact what was happening in their communities and the resources. The majority of people weren't, and so that whole process wasn't taken seriously. It was very tokenistic and symbolic. And I think we need to move past that.
Now, Anil Anand, retired inspector, in addition to being an author, you have also taught regularly in criminology, leadership, and other faculties. What are you telling concerned people who are coming up through the system, young people who are going to go into related fields of policing, criminology, and leadership? What's a good final message for them if they're watching?
I think the final message for anybody in any profession is not to fall prey to groupthink, to be skeptical, to be healthily skeptical of what it is that you're doing, what your agency is doing, what your profession is doing, and the opportunities that you have from learning from other agencies and other disciplines. I mean, the fact that we've got such large numbers of Black men incarcerated in the United States, the disproportionate incarceration of First Nations people in Canada, the disproportionate incarceration of Maoris in New Zealand, the disproportionate incarceration of Aboriginal people in Australia should signal that there are issues that manifest themselves far beyond the frontline policing. And so we need to step back and have a look at those issues and see what is it that is driving these sort of disproportionate dysfunctions in society that leads to really the fragmentation of society.
Anil, good book, a good talk. Thank you very much, and thanks on behalf of the Mackenzie Institute as well.
Alan, a pleasure as usual. Thank you very much.
Any views expressed here are not necessarily those of the Mackenzie Institute, its speakers, sponsors, or supporters, but the Institute is dedicated to fostering public discussion, debate, and education about security matters. Google the Mackenzie Institute to join the discussion. The Mackenzie Institute is grateful to its sponsors and supporters. Some of our short pods and long talks are a result of the support of Heathbridge Capital Management Limited, the National Post, and Dundurn Publishing.